Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of What About Grief? I'm Larry Holm. Before we dive into the interview, I'd like to just briefly say thank you to all who have sent feedback in regard to the podcast. I really do appreciate it. These discussions have been helpful to me in my grief journey, and it is my hope that this podcast is helpful to you with your own grief journey. And a reminder that you can get in touch with us via email at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com. We do enjoy hearing from you, our faithful listeners. Okay, enough business. Let's get to this month's guest. Doug Hoffpauir and I met in college at Baylor University, where we were in the same fraternity, Sigma Chi, in case you were wondering. And earlier this year, we reconnected in person at a fraternity reunion weekend. I knew Doug had lost his 26-year-old son, Zach, back in 2020. And he was kind enough to reach out to me when my wife, Sarah, passed away in 2021. So, there we were, at a gathering bonded by a college fraternity, and yet we were also members of another type of fraternity, one that nobody wants to be in, the one when a loved one passes away too early in their life. I reached out to Doug because he has an important story to share, and he is very open about his son Zach's life and the hell Zach went through. But also I want Doug to share his grief story about losing his son Zach. So Doug, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a little time since we've seen each other, but yeah, we are part of the two different fraternities, and kind of crazy thinking that that's where we are in life, but it's good to get back together with you.
Yep. Who would have thought during our college days, 30 some years later, here we are doing a podcast about grief. But I do appreciate you taking some time. Your son, Zach, had an incredible life, though it was cut off way too early. But give me a description of what Zach was like. What was his personality like? Paint a picture of Zach for our listeners.
He was definitely, I wouldn't call him crazy, but he was fun. He's a lot of fun. Light up the room when he walked in, talked to everyone. He really knew how to command a room, and it just not because he was trying to, it's just who he was. And, he's pretty popular, obviously, but he didn't shy away from talking to anyone and everyone, especially in high school. I get stories all the time about him, some person who considers themselves average, and Zach was the big guy around campus, and he would talk to them in the hallways or in cafeteria. So, Zach had a big heart. He was fun in our family. Everyone loved Zach, and obviously it was fun to watch him grow up and move into sports where he did. But so he was a great kid, good looking boy, and definitely had a lot of qualities.
Yeah, it seemed like it from everything that I read. And you all lived in Arizona, and that's where he attended high school, and he was a 3-sport athlete in high school. And then after several scholarship offers from numerous colleges, Zach decides to attend Stanford University, and he begins playing baseball and football during the 2012 season. What made him choose Stanford over the other colleges?
Everyone. He, if you really want to know, he had committed to Cal, and then we knew there were some issues there, but it came down to ASU and Stanford, and he really wanted to go to ASU because he had a couple buddies here. One ended up in the NFL, but he really wanted to play hometown guy, stay in Arizona. He was a homebody as far as he loved Arizona. He loved family. Didn't really want to be up that far away in the Bay Area, but we just had a lot of people talking to us and advice, and through baseball and football, they were like, hey, if Stanford offers, you got to take it. I mean, just the education alone. So the other thing that ASU and Stanford and Cal would allow him to do is play 2 sports. So, Stanford does it all the time. They've done it really well. Mm-hmm. And it kind of just fit in, like I said, I mean, to be honest, that wasn't his number one choice, but I think with the pressure on him to go to Stanford, that's where he decided to go, and it turned out really good for him. So
yeah. I mean, He was just shy of 140 tackles in high school and then secured 102 tackles on his own during his 4 seasons at Stanford, and I'm sure he was involved in numerous others. But it sounds like he was pretty intense on the field, as if making tackles and big plays was where he, got that adrenaline rush from. His teammate and very good friend at Stanford, Christian McCaffrey, who was a star running back at Stanford along when Zach was there and currently plays for the San Francisco 49ers, for those of you who might not follow the NFL, said that, and I quote, in regard to Zach was the hardest hitter, most aggressive player I ever played against. How would you describe him as a player, and what drove Zach to that intensity?
I would agree. I mean, he used to put the wood, as they say, on people. It was looking back, it's kind of funny, but he was a hard tackler. He was just, he put fear in people's. You could see it in their eyes. You could see them when they're on the field, when they're trying to catch a ball. And that was in high school. College is a little bit different, but he still was a hard hitter. He's very good at covering, but he's a really, really good tackler. And being that kind of, that's the game he played. He got some concussions through it, but he was one of those guys that he'd be the guy dancing on the sideline before the game. He'd be the guy getting everyone involved. It's kind of crazy seeing him with the DBs, and he'd be in a circle, and he'd be the guy leading them before the game and doing their dances and whatever it was. And Zach was usually pretty. On the field, he was pretty light as far as, trying to make people laugh on both sides of the ball. But when it came down to having to do his job, he did it. One thing I remember him talking about, we were in Washington playing University of Washington at their new stadium, and it's super loud. It's kind of like the Seahawks stadium. And you got 80,000 people booing Stanford. And one of his buddies came up to me after and just said, "Hey, man, did you hear what Zach said?" And I'm like, "No." He's like, "Well, He stopped us when they were in a huddle, and he's like, 'Hey, man, you guys hear that?' And they're like, 'What?' Because 80,000 people booing us. How great is this? This is something where Zach he thrived on it. He loved that stage. So it was fun. Christian and him were really good friends, and but they had some really good teams when Zach played there, good coaches, and so we were blessed to be there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So he's a few years under his belt at Stanford, and in 2015, during the Major League Baseball draft, he's selected by the Arizona Diamondbacks, decides to leave Stanford and play in the minor leagues. He plays for 1 season, but he returns in 2016 to Stanford and gets his old position back with the football team and ultimately has a medical retirement. What happened with that? Did he play in 2016 and then had to stop playing? What was the medical retirement? Too many concussions?
Yeah, too many concussions. If you look at him, the reason he left in 2015, because I think he would have, talking to guys, he would have had a good outlook at the next level, or at least a shot at it, I think. But he was struggling. He had a ton of anxiety, a ton of depression, taking phone calls all the time and trying to figure it out because, Zach was super humble. And I don't mean this to come out like it might sound, but like he was a big deal. His sophomore year in baseball, he was a top 2 hitter, and this is a kid coming from football. Usually we went to 2 Rose Bowls in a row, and you have 3 weeks to get ready while the rest of the team's been hitting for the fall and stuff. But he just had a lot of pressure on him. And, he had a great year sophomore year then, same junior year when he was playing football and baseball. And he was worn out. There were, to be honest, about a month before the end of baseball season that year, before he got drafted, he called me and we talked. He's like, "Dad, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know what's wrong with me, And here I'm thinking, like, Zach, the campus is gorgeous. You're doing great in school. You're doing great in sports. You got, lots of friends. And it's something I didn't understand because I'd never had depression or anxiety. And so he basically said, "Dad, I don't care about the money. I need to go. I need to have a break." And so Diamondbacks offered him he took it and went up to Montana with another local kid here. And I get a call from him about a week later, and he said, "Dad, I'm at peace."
Wow.
Yeah.
Getting out of the limelight and the pressure.
Right. And it's Montana, and we fly fish, and he loves, he's grown up in the outdoors or the beach and in Mexico, but it was great. But he did so well that he and his buddy got moved up right away to Portland 3 weeks later, and, never really got to enjoy that season. And, what people didn't understand is he was all the time doing something. It was either football meetings, or baseball. And all of that, he hardly had any time off during the year, maybe 2 weeks, because you get to Christmas, he'd come home for a day and a half, gone, come home, he gets a week and he's into baseball. And then he might get a week in the summer, maybe a week and a half. And so he was worn out. And that's kind of where he ended up with baseball. And, then he ended up missing baseball or football so much that, he's like, I got to get back to football. I want to use my last year up.
Gotcha. And he played, but then he had to retire midway through the season or at the end of the season?
Yeah, so what happened was he, and that's not the easiest thing to do, to come back after a year off, and then you've got different people in different positions, and, he won a spot back. He was mostly playing nickel, but he plays safety too. And, he was having a really good year, and I could tell he was a little different than he was before he left. And that's the first spring game I went to that year before he went back, and I had never been to spring because he's always playing baseball. And I noticed he's a little rusty, but something different. Zach was one of those guys that played, he knew where the ball was going to be, so that made him really quick, and he was fast. But my point is, I don't know if it was physically some issues that he was having. I think mentally he was fine, but I could tell there's a difference. But he ended up getting another couple concussions. With Zach, most of his concussions were a knee to the helmet. So when you're going down on guys like that, you're tackling low, you're going to get a knee to the helmet, and it's going to give you a concussion. Didn't happen a lot, but he had a couple his junior year. He had a couple his senior year when we went back 2016. And I think he had more in high school that I didn't know about.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's kind of where he ended up. I think it was the Oregon game he missed, and he got back in a couple games later, and we were at Cal. And I'm looking around, we're at the game, and I turn around, he's gone right before half, and I walk away all the way around the stadium and ask the guys where he is, yelling down there, and they're like his head. And so he didn't get to play in the bowl game. He talked to Coach Shaw, he talked to a bunch of people, and they just said, "Hey man, if I were you, it's not worth it to play." And then he had to medically retire just because, too many concussions.
Yeah, that must have been devastating, no doubt.
Yeah.
So he graduates from Stanford. Sounds like because of the concussions, the door is kind of closing on playing sports. He moves back to Arizona, and he moves in with you. And noticeable changes are going on in his everyday life. He's not sleeping, and personality traits weren't normal. He mentioned to you that his head didn't feel right. What was that troubling period like? How did you feel as a parent seeing your son, Zach, like this?
Well, it wasn't fun. And it was like, I'm sure same with you, Larry, and your wife. I mean, you have no control. You can't help them. Mm-hmm. You can't take chemo for your wife. You can't, I couldn't make Zach's brain and head feel better. I couldn't tell him how to think. I mean, it's a hopeless feeling, and you try anything and everything, whether it was, going to get IVs every other day at $300 a pop, or, sending them here, sending them there. And it was hard because he changed a lot, and he got super depressed, and he even had a couple bouts of OCD that I have never experienced before, almost like a broken record. And it was scary. And to be honest, which he would tell you if he was here, he had a DUI. That's when it really got bad. And I was on the phone with him, and ended up getting a call about an hour later. Thank God he didn't hurt anyone, didn't get in a wreck, but he got pulled over. And before he died, he was like, "That's the best thing that ever happened to me." I mean, he was glad that happened, in the sense of kind of put him made him think about life and all that was going on with him. But he had a lot of struggles. I mean, here I am, and I'm taking him over. Probably not something in that we were going to talk about, but I just remember taking him to court and doing all these things, and he had to spend the night in jail for 48 hours or something. Yeah, I think it was 48 hours. Anyways, and then he had to take all the classes. And here I am taking my son, but I'm sitting there to take him to the county jail here, and I'm standing in front of this door, and I'm looking at it like, really?
Yeah.
This is where we are?
Yeah.
You know, before I'm looking at the Rose Bowl, or I'm looking at my son playing on the field, or in baseball is super regional, whatever it is, all these things, and here I am, and it just kind of just showed you like, wow, none of that really matters. What matters is, you know, Zach and his health. And so, yeah, it was a really, really long road, and he struggled a lot. And there were times I didn't even know what to do, you know, and I remember him in his room, and I would walk by his room every day and get on my knees and pray for him. And that's really all I could do.
Yeah, I can imagine. It had to be so frustrating to be on the other side.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then in 2019, Zach attempts suicide by overdosing on Xanax and Benadryl. Describe what you know that might have led up to him deciding that the answer to his problems was trying to take his life.
Well, I just think he got into such a deep depression. He didn't know, you know, so he got meningitis. Here's all these meds, take it, you'll be fine. Mm-hmm. He ended up finding out he got Lyme disease right after this attempt, and he was in a really bad state right then. I mean, he wasn't a zombie, but my point is, like, he was
unrecognizable. It sounds like.
Yeah. Yes. And he was in his room a lot, and just I couldn't. And actually, at that time, I was going through a divorce, and I was staying with my parents. And I mean, you could imagine, you know, we all sat there and just was like, you know, you look at each other, and there was a lot of crying going on, and you know, there were other things going on. But that night, you know, when that happened, the next morning, I took him to go get an IV. It's therapy, and we were listening to, you know, a song on the radio, Christian song, and sobbing, both of us.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at him, and he said, "Dad, I didn't really want to die. I just don't know what to do. You know, everyone keeps telling me, hey, take this and do this, and these will help. This will help you. This will help you, and nothing's helping me, Dad. It's like hopeless." And you know, he just, for him to say that meant a lot to me. Like, hey, that's not really what I wanted to do. He said, actually, when he took the Benadryl, he tried to throw up and he couldn't. And he said, I laid down thinking, wow, this is not what I want. I don't want to die this way. So that kind of set up the whole conversation with Christian McCaffrey, because Zach was pretty close to him and they were talking, and Christian's been trying to get him to a doctor in Denver. And turns out, you know, Christian answered me right away. Get him out here. Christian did a lot. I mean, dropped everything and got Zach out there. And then he was diagnosed with Lyme disease. We had to wait a month. But it was good for Zach because he finally went, oh, okay, maybe this will help.
Some answers.
Yes, makes sense, because if you look at Lyme disease, it's the same as meningitis, same as CTE. It's all brain related. And so same thing. He gets on this. You can't even believe the amount of stuff he had to take, that poor kid. And he was after it for about 3-4 months, and nothing was helping. And so, you know, you kind of get to a point where you're like, man, what am I going to do? I remember him talking about his head all the time. Like, Dad, there's something wrong. I don't know what it is, but there's something wrong with my head. And so that's kind of where we found ourselves, you know, struggling with that period. It was a hard time.
Yeah. And then this is even just hard for me to ask, but fast forward to 2020. On the night of May 14th, Zach takes a Percocet to help him get some sleep. But what he didn't know was that pill was laced with fentanyl. And the next morning on May 15th, you're out fly fishing early in the morning, and you return home and you go into Zach's room and you find him there and he's dead, I can't even imagine what that was like for you. What went through your mind? What was your immediate reaction?
Well, like before that, you know, he had just gotten a job with Ed McCaffrey at Northern Colorado, and he seemed to be in really like, Dad, this is great. He was there for about 2 months. COVID hit, comes back, and you know, things changed. I mean, he was better, but he was still struggling.
Yeah.
But the difference was he had something to live for. Like, he had the video meetings in the morning with the coaches, and then he would talk to the kids through video because with COVID, you were shut down.
Yeah.
But yeah, that morning he was going to go fishing with my dad and I woke up at 3:15 to get ready and leave, and he comes at about 3:30 and just hugs me and says, "Dad, man, I'm sorry, I haven't been sleeping and I can't go. I got too much going on. I got the videos and I'm tired, but I can't sleep." And he goes, "I'd love to go with you and Papa." And I said, "Don't worry about it, Zach. It's okay." And I hugged him and I said, "I love you." And he said, "I love you, Dad." And that was it. I came home, took a nap, which I normally don't do. And I jumped out of bed around 1:15, jumped straight up, knew something was up.
Yeah.
Don't know why, but it was dead sleep to on my feet. Walk out of the room and I look at its door and I had placed a duffel bag there and it was still there. And I just got a sick feeling, opened the door and, you know, a stupid rental house, little room he's in. And there he was. He was laying back on his bed against his pillow, had one hand behind his head like he normally does. His other hand had his phone in his hand and it was resting on his chin. And when I opened the door, obviously I noticed something was wrong and went in there. And sure enough, you know, my wife Stephanie was there and she was in a different room and I was shocked.
Yeah.
And I walked up to him and I stared at him for a while and I grabbed his arm and what do you say?
Right.
What do you say? And so Stephanie came in and, you know, and then the whole spiral, you have to call this person and that person. And I had to call my daughter. She called my ex-wife and had to call friends. And I called his two best friends in the world, Christian McCaffrey and another local kid here, Bo Kitson, and had to listen to them and us sob on the phone. Christian was a mess. I mean, it was a big deal. It was not fun.
Yeah.
And that's one of those pictures you can't get rid of. I mean, obviously Hillary didn't get to see him and Shannon didn't see him and we wouldn't let him, but that's not a fun thing to walk in and then have that picture in your mind, the last thing you get to see your son. You know.
I can't even imagine. It's got to be the hardest thing that you'll ever go through. Rumors were that maybe Zach had overdosed, but I feel like from what I understand, you didn't believe that. And eventually you donated his brain to the Unite Brain Bank in Boston that focuses in on traumatic brain injuries and CTE, which is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which at this bank in Boston, a lot of NFL players donate their brain to for CTE study. What was their diagnosis on Zach's brain?
Yeah, that was kind of a strange call to get the day after he died. And they said, "Hey, we follow Zach. He's on, you know." Again, I hate sounding like, I don't want to sound like I'm arrogant at all. I mean, but his name goes across the ESPN thing about his death. And so they reach out and I said, "Yeah, sure. I mean, what do you do?" And so, and Zach, what's crazy is for a while he would hashtag CTE. And so they get his brain.
He knew it, huh?
Oh, yeah, he told me.
He had it, yeah.
Yeah, he used to say, "My head, something's wrong." He goes, "Dad, I have CTE." And I'm like, Jeez. "Okay, Zach, you know, like how, you know," but sure enough, we donate the brain. They fly it across the country. We had to wait a full year. And so almost to the date of his death, and I get a call from them and they're like, "Hey, you know," so we get on a Zoom and same thing. Here's what she says. He's got lesions all over his brain, stage 2. So for people that are following the NFL, Junior Seau had stage 2, and he committed suicide.
Yeah.
Just to say, hey, he had the same stage. He had lesions all over his brain. It sounds weird, but the piece that came over me was like, wow. So we have an answer.
Yeah.
Like, we know why he went through all this. And when you're a part of this group and you see they're probably up to 400 people now on there, maybe more, and you see the progression of CTE in NFL, soccer, it doesn't matter, hockey, but you see the progression of these people's lives all the same. Yeah. I mean, and it doesn't go downhill and then you start climbing up and you're fine. It's downhill, 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 to where you're just trying to breathe air and be a normal person. But looking back, I don't think Zach would have ever been the same Zach we would have known. I mean, and like my daughter said, whatever this sounds like, but thank God Zach left when he did, with the reputation he did, and he didn't hurt someone.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things, but that did give me a lot of peace, understanding, hey, this is why he struggled through all that stuff. And if you think about concussions in high school, and then he had them at Stanford, I mean, it all makes sense. And I was watching all these little changes, and I could tell, I looked back and went, man, that book, no wonder. I see, it's like a book was written out and it all made sense. Yeah. So we were thankful for that, for sure.
Yeah. Let's kind of transfer into your story now and the life after Zach and what you have and are going through. I know for me, no doubt, I wish Sarah was still alive, but I know that's not the reality. And that still, on a regular basis, can hit me hard. Have you been able to wrap your head around the reality that Zach really is gone? And if so, how?
It's probably like you. People are like, oh, I can't imagine, losing a son. It's different. And it is. But losing Sarah, losing your wife, losing someone that you sleep in the same bed with every day and you wake up and you live and love life together.
Right.
It's just a little different. It's not the same, but it's the same grief. It's the same stuff. And, with Zach, it's the same thing. It took me a while. Like, some days I'm like, gosh, I cannot believe he's seriously gone.
Yeah.
We have all these things. He has all these, again, take it for what it's worth, but he has all these great rings and crap like that, stuff that he could care less about. They're all in a box, Rose Bowl rings, all that. Doesn't care.
Yeah.
I do. As a dad, I did, because I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and you're proud of him.
He didn't care. Yeah. And he hardly wore Stanford, nothing. That's not who he was, but all that crap's here. His clothes are still here. He left everything, and that's when you start to realize, wow, he's not here. We're in a different house than when he was alive. So his room's not really his room, but it is, because I have some of his helmets and jerseys and, baseball bats and stuff out. And that's kind of how I deal with it. And not everyone's the same. His mom's not the same as me, but I tend to, if I walk by something and I see it and I embrace it, and I'm like, that was Zach, hey, or a picture even from his funeral. Like, what was crazy about his funeral is, in the midst of COVID, May 30, I think it was 30th, we had 3,000 people there.
Oh,
everyone's wearing masks. It was crazy. Wow. And I think I hugged probably 2,500 of them and never got COVID. But in the sense of, like, it was pretty amazing, the turnout, and that we were able to have that ceremony. It was a celebration of life. And I don't know about Sarah. I don't know how you guys dealt with that, but these poor people that went through COVID and couldn't have funerals or anything to celebrate their loved one that they lost, I could not imagine. Yeah. And I'm thankful that I had that chance. And, so I wear Zach's clothes. I can wear some of his stuff. What's crazy, people think I'm weird, but I never knew all these things, like, stuff that happens and numbers that pop up. He was 10, 31 in high school. He was 8 in baseball. And all of a sudden these numbers, maybe they did before, but they pop up everywhere, especially at restaurants. And now at my local coffee shop and my local restaurant I go to all the time, They would see me walk in, they hand me number 10 on, when you order your food, and they just know, because it gives me a chance to talk to people, and it's actually opened a lot of doors. And so I embrace that, and I embrace that. I mean, there are times, trust me, don't tell anyone, but I've got Taylor Swift on and the windows down, and I'll start crying. But no, it is funny because music has always been something that's really hit me hard. And there are times where, when you and I were in school at Baylor, my stress level, I would go get in my car in the middle of the night, 11 o'clock, and windows down and play music. And so I still do that and play music that Zach liked. And sometimes I look down at my phone, no lie, and it's calling Zach. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to listen to what it has to say. Maybe joking around, but hey, maybe someday he'll answer. Stuff like that. I don't shy away from it, but people are all different. I just think that, hey, celebrate. My personal opinion is, don't be afraid to talk about your loved one. Like don't be afraid to talk to Sarah, to people, because you know how it is. People walk up to you and it's awkward, and I just bring it up.
Yeah, no, and then she's my number one topic. I love talking about it. Why should I not?
You should. You're right. And same thing with Zach. Is just for me, I'm like, hey, I'll talk about him, and people don't get. Sometimes I'll apologize to my family, like, no, and people want to hear that. Yeah, they want to know you're okay. They want to know, about. Say they didn't even know your wife.
Right.
What a great way to honor them. What a great way to keep their memory. And that's the thing that I struggle with the most is, are people going to remember Zach 10 years from now?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do too many people remember John Wayne in the sense of, what I mean?
Right.
My point is, life is short, but for me, it is important to still talk about Zach and have people remember him. And his birthdays and stuff. The day of when he died, we do certain things, like we go to Chili's. He loved Chili's. I'd drive to Stanford every other weekend, in baseball, football, whatever it was. And hey, let's go to a great restaurant. We're in Palo Alto. He's like, let's go to Chili's. I'm like, seriously, Zach? So every weekend. So now it's funny, we just did it, but we go to Chili's and order the trio or whatever it is, the triple, and that's our just going out and having a good time and honor Zach, and it's a lot of fun.
To him. Yeah.
Yep. Sure does.
Well, on a much lighter note, at Sarah's funeral, it was during COVID. People wore masks. I hugged everybody, and I didn't get COVID either. So there's another thing that you and I are bonded by. I really thought I was going to, get COVID and be down for 2 weeks, but nobody that I know of the 300 or so that were at Sarah's funeral got COVID. So I don't know.
That's so funny. And I'm the same way. Like, I didn't hear of anyone. And actually, to tell you the truth, I bet you 95% of the people weren't wearing masks. And it was just one of those deals like, hey, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen.
Exactly. Might be worth it to celebrate it.
So thankful you got that chance, because, there were people in hospitals dying all over and no one could even talk to them.
Right.
So,
anyways. Sarah had to watch her father's funeral in 2020 from our laptop at home. Because she couldn't fly, due to her cancer and with COVID and everything.
Wow.
What kind of advice would you share for others who have lost their children at a young age?
Kind of the same thing. Just my parents were a little different. We have a family business, but we weren't someone that, hey, let's save up and hold $10 million in the bank. Not that we would have had that, but my point is, we did things. We made memories, and so because of that, we were able to use those memories in places that we've gone, whether it's Mexico or the mountains or whatever, and remember Zach and remember the good times. And so it's hard. I mean, to lose a child, it's hard. And to talk to people is a huge thing. Yeah. I don't tell too many people this, but two of my best friends from high school, one from church, one from high school, one lost his son in 2017 to suicide, and one just lost him last year to suicide. And the chances of me being around two other guys that were like literally best friends, kind of weird. I mean, I don't know what the odds are, but guess what? We have something in common, and we talk about it, and we bring it up, and we celebrate each other's kids and their birthdays and whatever it is. And that's what I think. And I don't know, you could tell me how you dealt with Sarah, but I think getting together with people and talking about it, I mean, look at your podcast.
Right.
And This is what I think. People get so afraid to talk about it. And Zach died. He didn't, I don't mean to sound this way either, but he died. He didn't pass away. He died. And so death is, to me, I'm like, just put it out there. This is what it is. And it's hard to deal with, but with the help of others, and obviously my Christian walk too. I mean, I know where Zach is. I'm not worried about it. I know he's probably wouldn't want to come back here and struggle like he did before.
Right.
And so, getting around people and other people that have done the same thing and gone through the same thing, I just think it's wise for people, instead of hiding from it, is just embrace it, talk to people, talk to other people that have gone through it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm here to help people, whether it's on the podcast or somebody at work who just comes up to me. We have experienced something, and I feel like we need to help when we can,
Yeah, I honestly, I thought about you when we talked a year ago, and I just go, man, I love my wife, and I just can't imagine. I can't imagine waking up and not having her there.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how you got through it, but
day by day, moment by moment, as you probably, moment by moment.
Yeah.
I think in dealing with grief and loss, there are always regrets. Do you have any?
I thought about this a lot, and I don't have one regret, but most everything was Zach. I'm so thankful. I mean, God allowed me to have a job that I could take off. And I mean, from the time my kids, Hillary too, I talk about she might have been a better athlete than Zach. I always joked around with him, but I got to follow my kids around. I got to watch them play in high school and club and, in college. And, so thankful that I got to spend all those times. And we, as families, we'd go to Mexico on week trips, and we'd go to Colorado all the time. We'd go fishing. We'd make so many memories. So I'm so thankful for that. Mm-hmm. I have all those memories to remember my son from, but the only regret, and on a lighter side, is when we finally moved out of my parents' house, we were I got married. We rented a house, and it was super small. And I think Zach's room was probably 5 by 5. It was a little bigger, but his bed was probably 2 by 2. But anyways, it was funny that, we live in Arizona. It's summertime and it's super hot in there. And our electric bill was $500 in a 1,500 square foot house. And I'm like, we had this fight on the AC all the time. Like, dude, you can't put it back. And he'd change it. And that poor kid, he'd be sweating. And I look back and I'm like, I don't care if it costs $1,000 a month. I should have just turned the freaking. And what's funny is we moved out, and I was renting it from a buddy of mine, and he ended up replacing that AC because it was bad. He said that thing was running all the time.
Too
I'm
funny.
like, really?
Yeah.
So, but anyways, that's really honestly the only regret I have. I don't have any regrets. I think, like I've always said, Zach's days were numbered. Doesn't matter what I could have done, what anyone else could have done for Zach. Those were his times. He lived a short life, but man, he lived a lot more life than I did in my 55 years. So, no regrets on that. Just the AC. That's it.
I'll think of you every time now I'm playing around with my air conditioning.
There you go.
Let me wrap it up with this, because I'm always interested when I interview people on what they do on the day of their loved one's death. How do they celebrate? Might not be the right word, but how do they remember? And what do they do on the day of their loved one's passing? So on May 15th every year, the day Zach passed away, what do you do?
We still do the Chili's thing, but the other thing we do, I hope it doesn't sound selfish, but I post something, and it is selfish in the sense of it helps me because I post it and I see all these people saying things and, I let you know, I'm sorry, but that's cool. And that helps me. And that just brings back the memories. Okay, Zach was such a huge influence on so many people. Larry, I'm going to say probably 30 different people that reached out to me that half of them I didn't even, well, more than half, I didn't even know who they were. And they were like, man, Zach, he coached me and da-da-da-da-da. Or Zach got me through the worst time of my life. Zach got me through suicide attempts. Zach got me through. And I, over and over again, people I don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
And they were reaching out to me. One kid at Northern Colorado, Zach was with for 2 months. This kid and I talk all the time. And he was a kid that Zach brought in, and to his office and talked to him about life and said, forget about football right now. Let's talk about life. There was coaching changes going on, and this kid was kind of in the middle of everything. And he tells me to this day, he's like, Zach believed in me. He believed in who I was as a person. He believed in who I was as a football player. But Zach took the time to spend that time with me and talk to me and get to know me and not just be that coach that's X and O's. And so for me, I mean, in a selfish way, I'd look forward to that every year. I post something, whatever his birthday, it's either his birthday or the day that he died. And such great things that people say.
I do that too. And it's good for me. It's healing for me. And I think, people are going to be tired of seeing these remembrances of Sarah's birthday or her passing. But you know what? It to your point, it's the exact opposite. People loved Sarah, they loved Zach, and they're still in their lives. And these little reminders once or twice a year is therapeutic for us all, I think.
Well, and for you, I wish I would have known your wife. And I know you probably hear that a lot. I heard a lot about Zach. And,
sure.
And guess what? Sad to say, but if she didn't die, if Zach didn't die, would I have known much about her? Would you know much about Zach? Probably not.
Yeah.
So there is a bright side to all of this. Death is horrible. It hurts us. It's crazy how everyone left on earth has to deal with this. We are here for a short time, all of us. So, but it's something we have to get through. And, I do appreciate you reaching out to me, and I do appreciate you letting me say what I need to say. And this helps me too. And I'm sure, like I said, talking about Sarah for you, I'm sure it helps you too. And I do appreciate you reaching out.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And I do thank you for taking the time to share your story about Zach. He was a beautiful soul that really had an influence on so many people in so many different walks of life. And I thank you for being so honest and open about your part of it and Zach's story. And I do hope that if there's anyone listening, who is a parent and going through something similar, that hearing your story is helpful or offers them some comfort. So thank you, Doug.
Oh, no problem. I appreciate it. And, just think of Zach dancing around. He's still on the internet if you want to look. So I appreciate it, Larry, and I do appreciate your friendship, and thanks for having me on.
We'll see you at the next reunion.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks.
All right, bye.
My thanks to Doug Hoffpauir. What About Grief is available monthly on all major podcast listening platforms. Please follow the podcast as well as rate and review the show on Apple Podcast. The executive producer of What About Grief is Marsha Anderson. Logo artwork was designed by TED Studios. This episode was recorded at BAM Studios in Chicago. And lastly, feel free to email us at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com.